Now this is quite a simple, straightforward, easy to use software package which enables us to very quickly and easily undertake all kinds of statistical analyses, from the simple through to the extraordinarily complicated. And you'll be pleased to hear that we're going to be starting off with the simple. As you can see at the moment, we have a number of columns, all of which are labelled VAR, which is short for variable, and we have no data. Everything is blank. So this is where we're going to type our numbers in. Now, if you notice at the bottom left of the screen, there are two tabs. One called Data View, which is what we're in at the moment, and the other called Variable View. Now, Variable View is where we're going to be able to set up our columns, specify what we want them to be. So if I just click on the Variable View, so this is the Variable View. This is where we specify the details of the variables that are going to appear in the data set. Each row going across in this window corresponds to one of the columns in the data view. So I'll just show you very quickly. Let's just say I've collected some data and it's a score on a test. So I'm just going to name this score. And if I go back to data view, you can see that the first column is now headed score. So going back to variable view, you can now see that all of the other boxes have been filled in with the default values. Now most of these things we don't actually need to change very often, if at all. So I'm just going to focus on the ones that may be important and you quite often need to change. Decimal places is currently set to 2. So if I go back to data view, if I type in a score, let's say somebody scored 15 on the test, then if I put that in, you can see it comes up to be 15.00. That's because in variable view it's set to 2 decimal places. Now if I don't want to enter decimal places, it's not a problem, but I don't necessarily want all these .00s because it just increases the clutter in the data set and makes it more difficult to look at. So I can just adjust the decimals down to 0 just by adjusting this. And if I go back to data view, it now says 15. Okay, so going back to variable view again, we could adjust the number of decimal places into how many you want. So if you wanted to enter something with 8 or 9 decimal places, you can. And you can make the space for it by adjusting it here. So I'm just going to leave this on 0. So the label box can be used for providing yourself with a reminder of what that variable actually was. So rather than just say score, I could say this was score on a 25 item memory test. Now when you've just got one variable and a simple data set, which is largely what you'll have for the time being, the labels might not be that important. But when you've got multiple variables, let's say for example you have a questionnaire or an attitude scale in which you've asked people 40 or 50 questions, you probably want to enter the data into SPSS individually. So you'll have one column of data for each item on the scale, for each item on the questionnaire. So the name is limited, but in the label box you can type in what the whole item actually said. So it can be very useful in that way. And as you'll see later on, these labels appear when it comes to do the analyses that we want to do and when the results come out of those analyses. So that's labels. So we can enter as many names as we like. Let's say people have done the test again and they've got a second score, which I might call score 2. So I enter that. You see this also comes up with all of the values here. So if you just look along here, we've got name, type, width, decimals, label, values, missing, column, align, measure and roll. The ones on the right hand end you very rarely need to change. The ones that are more important and more useful are decimals, label, values, and later on missing. I'm going to come back to talk about values later on when I talk about entering different types of data. So we've got our 2 columns set up. I could just type in the scores, however many I need, and I can type in the second score. Okay, so you can see this one is still set to 2 decimal places. I can go back, I can adjust that to 0. Now, one thing that's very important in SPSS is that if you put 2 scores side by side, or anywhere in the same row, the assumption is that those 2 scores have come from the same person. So if this were an experiment in which we've got score 1 and score 2, this score, the score of 15 in the first row, would be one person's score on the test, and the 16 would be that same person's score on the test a second time. So each pair of scores, each numbered row, corresponds to an individual participant. We'll come back to this later on again when we talk about how to deal with different types of experimental design and the kind of data that they produce. But basically that's how you put the data into SPSS, that's all there is to it.